Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, welcome once again to another episode of the Professor Game Podcast, and today we have with us Shawn. Are you prepared to engage?
I'm ready, Rob. Let's do it.
Let's do this. Shawn Livermore, he is the author of the Amazon best-selling business nonfiction book, Average Joe, Be the Silicon Valley Tech Genius. Congratulations for that book and that best-selling status, Shawn. And that book is there to teach anyone how to think, speak, and create like some of the brightest tech founders in the world. It is there to dispel the myth of the tech genius and then, in a twist, reveal how to become the myth yourself. He also runs Product Perfect, a software consultancy in Southern California. Shawn, is there anything that we're missing from that intro?
No, Rob, thank you very much.
Let's get to this because, Shawn, we would like to know, you're all of these things, software consultant, you're a best-selling author. What does being Shawn in a day like today look like?
Well, coffee, email, product review sessions, deep dives into requirements, helping clients realize their dreams, and try to live out my own daydreams while I work through my day job.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. And Shawn, we like to start these interviews sort of strong with failure or fail, the first attempt in learning. And I know you've done a lot of research around gamification, games, and so on. So I'd like to know if you have any story of, yourself, one of your clients, another story you've researched about a failure and, what happened through that. What can we take from that failure and learn how to maybe even turn it into a success in the future?
Absolutely. So the book goes into, in chapter 7, we talk about gamification and the cognitive mechanisms that game developers employ to trick, coerce, and cajole users to tap, swipe, and click. And it's very fascinating, the mental gymnastics that we have to go through to justify to ourselves, why not click on that button? Why shouldn't I upgrade my account? Why shouldn't I give them $10 through PayPal right now to get 47 bonus points so that I can spin the wheel just one more time, right? And so there's a lot of buzz in Silicon Valley about, how far down the brainstem should we be going? And Tristan Harris has been outspoken. There's The Social Dilemma on Netflix. People are very aware now of the manipulative behaviors, and trust of big tech is at an all-time low. Putting all this together, and as we enter the next decade of development and work and product, there is a moral consensus building. There's a Venn diagram of people who are entering into the capitalistic mind and those who are dovetailing that with and merging into that the ethical mind. And the ethics of game development, I think Google had a huge kerfuffle around their ethicist, the person who they brought in to make sure that they were doing the right things and following the right sort of paradigms. And then
do no evil, right?
Yeah, do no evil, yeah. But then in a twist, they fired that same person. So I see it as an interesting banker meets dreamer moment, and in the book we talk about that, how, games and development and product come into contact with the banker and the financier. And there is an overlap of incentives and alignment, but there's not always a perfect fit. But I think about failure and how you frame that, and think about the cognitive mechanisms, and I think about some of the products that have stumbled onto success as well. And so I think we could talk about that too.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, Flappy Bird, for example, a great example in 2013, a man by the name of Dong Nguyen had created a product that was reminiscent of Super Mario Brothers, where it went from left to right. It was called Flappy Bird, and it sat at the very bottom of the game category for family. and fun. And if I remember properly, it was at like number 1400 at the very bottom. And then 4 or 5 months later, through a series of random posts and mysterious and murky help, I'm addicted to this game type posts, it all of a sudden shot up to the top and it stayed on number one. And the guy at one point was making $50,000 a day on Flappy Bird. Now, that equates to $20 to $30 million a year, and you start doing some math, and you've got yourself a nice little buyout, right? And yet it got weird. People started posting that they're addicted to the game, and they're complaining. They're we don't know if these posts are real or if it was just one of those great marketing anonymous posts. I must try this game too if it's people are so addicted to it. It must be amazing. Let me get addicted to it. And so that fun of clicking on the screen at 2 a.m. when you're not sure why you're awake, you want something simple that you can click on. And the UK Telegraph newspaper described Flappy Bird as, the quote, the most frustrating game in the world, right? You think about that for a second. The most frustrating. We're talking about a bird flapping up and down. Why was it so frustrating? Well, the answer to that was two things. Number one is he made it really simple, right? When all the other game developers were trying to really stretch the iPhone to how far could we take this product, and let's add in all these puzzles and let's make it all complicated. Let's introduce new user interface paradigms. No. He kept it really simple. All you do is tap the darn screen and the bird goes up, And it got really interesting when it worked. He had people who were studying his mechanics, and they actually had one guy, a New York physics teacher, Frank Noshiz. He was so compelled and so engaged in the physics of Flappy Bird that he went out and diagrammed and mathematically calculated the ebb and flow of the bird as it went up and down, and the vertical turn and all these parabolas. He literally created calculus around the gravitational acceleration and tried to reproduce the mechanism and say, I have now found the formula of a viral game. Of course, that didn't really lead to anything, but it's just amazing what people will do to try to replicate success. But it was very addictive because dopamine was firing, in the brain. And I know all people listening now, exactly what I'm talking about when I say dopamine and the 20 neurotransmitters that are activated in our brain in the pituitary gland when we encounter both rewards and costs, right? The pain and the stress releases cortisol and some of these other serotonin type chemicals. And anyway, the success of that was a wonderful story in marketing, in creativity, in user interface design. But the other thing that really caused it to be the most frustrating game in the world was it was harsh. It was very harsh. If that bird touches a pipey, it's dead. It's literally dead, and you snap your fingers, you're done, right? Game over. I don't care if you get to level 104, you get no extra lives, you're dead, right?
You're done.
You're done. And that's so unfair. At least Mario, you had the ability to get another life if you collect enough coins, right? But he really positioned himself at the far end of the spectrum so that people would see this as a very unfair game. And it arguably could not be won. In fact, there's no one that can really testify from my research that there was a final level. I'd love to see the comments on this podcast. If you got to the final level of Flappy Bird, email me at Shawn@productperfect.com. I would love to hear about that, or Shawn@averagejoetechgenius.com for the book website. I would love to hear about that because my research, there is no end to the game. He literally created unlimited levels, dynamically incremented the level number, and the user just keeps perpetually being frustrated, right? There's no winning. So, right. And he tried it. It was a growth hack, if you will. The whole game was sort of a growth hack, and it worked.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. And now that you've mentioned this, you also mentioned this physician who hacked the code for making a successful game, which, as we know at this time, several years later, was probably not the real thing that actually happened. But what would you say, what are maybe some keys, something that you would say, well, look into this, look into that you would say, well, these are some keys that you could say when you're thinking about behavioral science, when you're thinking about games and gamification, what are some of the things that we should be looking at?
Deepak Chopra famously said a quote. He said, "To think is to practice brain chemistry," right? And everything we do is chemical in our brains. And I do believe that God created us and that we are, magically a extension of his ingenuity and his creativity. But I do think that the neurotransmitters that are inside of us definitely work, and they work quite well. And so I think learning about neurotransmitters, if you're going to create a game and you don't know the 20 plus neurotransmitters of endorphin, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, etc., then you really should stop. You really got to learn, because whether you want to manipulate a user or not, the user's brain is going to be firing. And so you need to know what's going on at the other side of the spectrum. And if you want to enter into ethical behavior around that, certainly I'd recommend that. Look up Tristan Harris's new .org that he's putting together, and try to shape your product around that so that it fits in the mold of what a utopian society might look like around software. But I do think that the path to reward is paved with many drips of dopamine, as one man put it. I think that you have to engage with the user where they're at and how they're experiencing your product, and know the incremental adjustments that you can make along the way. Candy Crush, right? I mean, this was a heavy juice product. The juice, of course, is that thin layer of dings and zings that make that product responsive and powerful. And so the juice of Candy Crush, that surface feedback, as they call it, is essential. Without that, the game creators said it loses its charm. And so
there's no game without feedback, right?
Oh, totally. And the cleverness of the feedback and how it's presented to the user is endlessly arguable. I mean, there's so many games that you're impressed by how they just rewarded you. Did you just reward me? You gave me what? A new sword. Oh, wow. Or 4 new pebbles to shoot out of my slingshot, and one of them's a blue one. What does that mean? Let me tap on that, and weird things like that. I want a blue one. Oh, the green one's better than the blue? Okay, let me go, It's pretty simple stuff, but it all turns back to You Got Mail back in the late 80s or I guess, mid 90s, right? You've got mail, right? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're probably under the age of 34, 33. It's a Generation X kind of thing, but this user manipulation started at the very beginning, and it never has ended. So either if you want to deny it exists, okay, that's fine. You can be in denial. If you want to ride the wave with an ethical boundary, okay, well, that's kind of where I landed. Or if you want to ride the wave without ethical boundaries, well, you'll probably get rich quick, but I don't know if your employees will like you as much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, we have 2 episodes on ethical gamification. One where I sort of kicked off the topic with some of the research I've made, some of the decisions that we take a look at, and another one with one of the people that I actually quoted, Andrzej Marchewski, who created the code of ethics in the gamification world. And, I'm a subscriber of that code, and we went back and forth about it. But there's so much more we could get on around the ethics. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is a fundamental question to ask ourselves, especially when you are doing something that some people would argue, and you can go back and forth whether it is mere manipulation every single time or not, but it probably is some form of manipulation, or it has a big potential to be so. So there, it is a big consideration that you definitely need to have. And talking about ethics, talking about all these good ideas that you gave us, is there any sort of, I don't know, maybe best practice? I don't want to call it the silver bullet or anything, but something that you would say, well, if you're thinking of gamification, include these thoughts, include these ideas so that maybe your project will be a little bit better.
I think learning about Skinner's boxes, in the book we talk about operant conditioning and how the slot machine reward model that was based on, in 1957, behaviorist and psychologist B.F. Skinner and his work with rats and with pigeons, and in learning the true history of operant conditioning and how the pellets or the little food rewards made the animal do certain things, and being able to tell narratives around your product with that in mind. And then learning the reinforcement versus punishment model, positive and negative reinforcement, and the core concepts and the building blocks of that history make you more authoritative when you're speaking to your team and when you're crafting a product. You need to really know the science behind it and the research, because This guy spent decades. I'm talking decades, every day, all day long. And then he got grants and more funding. And so you have 10 to 20 people for like 20 years. Well, let's add up all the man months, and let's all add up all the units of value. And you take all that and you start putting it toward a narrative of your product, and you instantly have this amazing amount of funding that you never knew you had that reinforces the words that drip from your mouth. So I really do believe that makes a huge difference. The other one would be to really set up a diametrical model or a mental model that is a defensive mechanism in nature toward your product. So if you're designing a product or a game, for example, that is designed to do A, B, and C, A, B, and C need to be codified, buzzword friendly, and they need to fit into a mental model. And you need to be able to tell the story with a 2x2 matrix or some sort of visual paradigm on a whiteboard within 60 seconds. And it needs to include A, a historical precedent, B, a scientific and mathematical proven fact, and C, a test and a result of that test. So history, science, and testing. If you can put that into a whiteboard story, you're ready. You're ready to build that product. If you can't, and you're saying, well, I don't know, I just made a game and it's kind of cool and I could make it better and I'm looking for ways to make it better. Well, stop what you're doing, put it on the shelf, go back and research the topic area underneath your game and watch the ground shift beneath your feet. Watch yourself in your mental models and the paradigms that you're thinking through become better and get stronger. And then you're ready to talk to investors because they see the fundamentals of it. And they respect the fundamentals of it, and they see you, and they'll respect you. There's a difference between a kid with a toy and a man with a factory that creates toys.
Makes a lot of sense. And many who are listening as well might be thinking of creating that breakthrough game, that breakthrough product for investors to be looking at. So I think that is fantastic advice, actually. And talking about advice and talking about the questions we've been talking about, and of course, you've made a lot of research as well in the area of gamification. Is there maybe somebody, again, ideally, it's somebody that we can actually eventually get into contact with, but if not, it can be, your dream guest, somebody that you would say, well, I would really be interested in listening to the answers of these questions by this very interesting individual. Who would you suggest us to bring in as a guest to Professor Game Podcast?
Gosh, I would say Evan Spiegel from Snapchat might be one. And as we think about filters, I love playing Snapchat with my 21-year-old in college, and it's just stupid filters, making your eyebrows huge or distorting your voice or whatnot. We're just goofing around. And I'd say beyond that, maybe some of the founders and key product owners over at Twitter and think about how to take that platform and what they've already built and turn it into something that is expansive. Right now, it's extremely narrowly scoped. And their product team has been heavily scrutinized for being too narrowly scoped and keeping that product on lockdown. But I would say those two groups of people would be very interesting.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I think, I'm sure you've read and you've researched a lot more than I have into the Twitter. But I am under the impression that it is by design that they've been saying Twitter is Twitter and that's it. Whereas and that they were sort of in a similar timing at some point. Facebook said quite the opposite. I mean, they started off, they had their core, and then they started expanding around. Do you think they made the wrong choice? Like, is there any quick opinion that you can give us around this situation with Twitter?
I'd say Ev Williams, co-founder of Twitter, said it's always been about the user experience. And he went on to, I think, put Medium together. And I think, by design, you want a product that is squarely focused on solving a very specific hunch of a customer or desire or unmet desire that the customer didn't even know they had. Some sort of ominous need would not qualify, but they solved a specific need. And I think it goes into their tagline that I saw the other day is, what's going on? That's the question that Twitter answers. Hey, what's going on? Right? What's happening in the world? And I like also to see that it's the buzz of the people, right? It's the background thread of thoughts that are going through people's minds that they're a little too scared to say, or those that don't necessarily have the same equal platform as celebrities in Hollywood, for example, but they became famous through other means. And what do they think about things? Anyway, I think the what's going on answer, but keeping it narrowly scoped is certainly extremely important for a product success. You don't want to be too broad. If you do everything, you do nothing, right? Marketing says if you say 3 things, you said nothing, right? So the brevity of your messaging is key. Also, if it's not interesting, Malcolm Gladwell, best-selling author, my favorite author, he says, when I'm looking for the next story, people say, they ask me, what is it about the story that you find as the carrot that people will swipe their hand after? And he said, the one question is it interesting? Is it interesting? And he writes because it's interesting, not because necessarily it's fanciful or it's immediate in its time period. It could be old, it could be new, but is it interesting? And I think the startup, does it hit me between the eyes and does it change my mental state? I think those are the two, of alertness and mental state adjustment and relevance to the customer that's touching it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And continuing in sort of this recommendation mode, right next maybe to Average Joe or, before it, right after it, on a very different topic, is there a book, of course, again, right after your book, Average Joe, that you would recommend this audience, the engagers, that they should read, that they should take a look at? What book would that be and why?
Oh, gosh, there's so many. Oh, geez. I mean, I love Good to Great by Jim Collins, just as a general business book, foundational. Gosh, there's just so many books. I think of Seth Godin, Linchpin is a great book where he talks about how to become the indispensable. And one of the things in my consulting firm that I try to be to my clients is dispensable. I want to work myself out of a job. I want them to grow as a firm and as an initiative, as a movement. But at the same time, in a juxtaposition, quite paradoxically, you seek to become indispensable to them as they become independently aware of their own deficiencies or deficits and seek to remedy them. You also seek to help them in their next wave of effort. Even if you succeed with glorious, outcomes and they love you for it, well, that's great. The friends you make along the way will help. You'll ride another wave with them, and there's so many waves to ride in the world, right? So becoming indispensable to people, I think through Linchpin is a great book to seek out by Seth Godin.
Absolutely. So Seth Godin, Linchpin. And talking about these recommendations, what would you say is your favorite game? I know we in the pre-interview chat, we talked about a couple of those. What would you say? And I know this is a difficult one. There's many interesting games out there. What would you say is your favorite?
Well, it may not satisfy the audience, but I love Super Mario Brothers. I'm talking old school, Part 1, Nintendo NES. What is it, 8-bit or 16-bit?
Yes, 8-bit.
I just love it. It's that child in me that hits the A and B buttons and you go left to right. It's so simple. It's not hard. It's... My kid,
simple and yet very complicated as well. I mean, not everybody got to the last level.
Yeah, not everybody did. I definitely beat that thing a few times, and I felt like I was on top of the world. I don't know, but in terms of the classics, I think that one is hard to beat.
Absolutely, it is a absolutely fantastic game. And what would you say, Shawn, is your superpower, that sweet spot, that thing that you do at least better than most other people?
Thank you for asking. The reason I'm going to give you this answer is through Average Joe, myself and a neuroscientist, Dr. Jesse Rissman, PhD out of UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, here in Southern California, spent time in 2020 together on many, many meetings. And we were seeking out how the average person can engage in highly creative activity. How can we take an average Joe, hence the book, and turn them into a tech genius? And the answer was, well, they would need to systematically and repeatedly go through a set of neuroscientific activities. Well, what does that look like? And he began to describe all this. And I used my software architecture background and my product creation background and consulting background, and I consulted for myself. And I said, well, here's how we would turn that into a mental model. And then he and I revised that many, many times and turned it into a framework. And so the Slow Create framework, you can check it out at slowcreate.com or averagejoetechgenius.com for the book and learn about it from there, and it links off to that. is a free downloadable framework with videos and instructional guides that helps anyone learn how to think, speak, and create like a tech genius. But even outside of the tech industry, whether you're a soccer mom or a farmer or whatever you do, it helps you innovate and create systematically over the long periods of time. So you have in the back of your head ideas, you have innovations that you've tinkered with. You're an innovator, you're a game creator, you're a dreamer. A lot of these things will slip through the cracks of your brain because you are not efficiently operating. You are going about your day, paying your bills, but you're not slowing down and documenting in a systematic model in a way that is optimal for brain activity. And so the Slow Create framework is my superpower. That is what I know how to do. And I can take anyone and turn them into a more optimized version of themselves in a couple days of learning that framework. So I'm looking at maybe doing another book on that or maybe an online class or something and putting more resources against that. But that is what I would say my superpower would be.
That sounds like a fantastic superpower, and especially because it involves helping others. And I think that is a very important part of superpowers, that they're not just, for your own benefit. That's what heroes tell us, that we see in comic books. As you can tell, yes, I am a geek and I'm proud to be one, but it doesn't matter. That's good. That's all good. And that's one of the other reasons why we are talking here. And thank you very much, Shawn. I know we had some tech glitches. We had some scheduling glitches before that, but I'm very happy that we had you today. This was a very different interview to what we're sort of used to, but I think it was very, very inspiring to all of our listeners. And Shawn, is there any final words, any final piece of advice you would like to leave the engagers with? Then, of course, please let us know where we can find more about you, about the average Joe, about your software consultancy, where we can find all that information before we say it's game over.
Yeah, check out the book, averagejoetechgenius.com, and it has a link to the book on Amazon or anywhere else. Hit me up with a review if you love it. Thank you so much in advance for that. But the book itself culminates 21 years of my learnings and takes you from the beginning to the end of where you could be. I believe it really will improve your ability to create product, and whether that's a game or a tech product or your startup or even outside of the tech industry. So check out the book and follow me on Twitter at ShawnnyPants. And I'd love to come on again, maybe for Slow Create another time. But thank you, Rob.
Let's Slow Create as well. So thank you again very much, Shawn, for investing this time in this audience, in the engagers, in spreading all that knowledge through your book, through these interviews as well. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it is fantastic to have you around, and this podcast makes sense with you. So let's connect. Let's do so on Twitter, for example. There you can let me know if you have any suggestions for guests, if you have questions, anything we might be able to help you with on Professor Game. You can find my Twitter account on professorgame.com/Twitter. I'm sharing content on gamification, on the episodes, and especially, as you know, around gamification, game-based learning and education. But, before you click continue, remember to subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.